down about 5% at the time of recording this video, following the reciprocal tariff announcement last night. And let me tell you, this is actually not bad relative to what some other stocks are doing. Let me give you a few examples here. Apple's down 8%, Meta's down 6%, Amazon's down 7%, Nvidia is down 6.5%, and Nvidia is not even subject to tariffs either. So Tesla outperforming all of these other names is actually a good sign. Here in this video, I will share with you all of the news you need to know around Tesla and all of the reciprocal tariff news. And yeah, it's a crazy day. This is going to be a crazy video. Just buckle up, get ready, and let's get started. Now, first things first, the Dow is down 3.1%, S&P is down 3.75%, NASDAQ is down almost 5%, and the Russell 2000 is down about 6%. The VIX is up to 27.35, which is not as high as it was on March 10th. So a bit of a spike today for sure. But here's the thing. You don't have real fear out there. And I know some people look at the VIX and only the VIX, but it's not representative of fear. Let me show you why. You could look at XLP, Consumer Staples. Okay, it's green today. This ETF is up 1.14%. Close to, it was up like 1.5%. There's not a lot of fear out there. Look at the bonds. TLT is only up 0.6%. There's no fear. Okay, or I shouldn't say there's no fear. There's not a lot of fear out there, which, when you look at the VIX, you'd think there's fear out there. But when you actually look under the surface, this is a pretty just typical red day for markets. It is a big one, but there's not fear out there. If there was fear out there, everything would be selling off indiscriminately. You know this. August 5th, the last real flash crash we had, everything sold off. There was nothing that did well that day. 80-90% of stocks were down. That is real fear. That's not happening today. And whenever there is true fear out there, bonds catch a bid. And that's happening a little bit, but not really, right? A true fear day, you could see TLT up 2 to 3% to 4%, maybe 5%. That it's just not happening. Like what you had on August 5th, right? August 2nd and August 1st. During that whole yen flash crash, TLT was up 1%. And then on August 2nd, it was up 3%. On August 5th, it was up 0.5%. You're not seeing that today, right? There is no fear out there, which makes you wonder, is this, getting close to the end of the correction? Or is this just kind of what we need to go through? Now, you can also see the RSI, while it's not a gauge of fear or not, it's a gauge of relative strength. Markets are at new lows today, and the RSI is at 34.61. So technically, there is more room to fall from here before the index is oversold, and you would go through that oversold bounce. So that's the first thing to establish. There's not a lot of fear out there. Even though the VIX is spiking today, people are not fearful. And when there's a lack of fear, a lack of panic, that is usually not the end of a correction. The end of a correction is usually marked by capitulation, massive just panic. And that's not where we are right now. So keep that in mind. It suggests that there's probably more downside pressure on markets to come. Also kind of shooting down some of the expectations that Elon Musk would be leaving Doge soon. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary for Donald Trump, says this scoop is garbage. Elon Musk and President Trump have both publicly stated that Elon will depart from public service as a special government employee when his incredible work at Doge is complete. So kind of walking back some of the timeline that Elon would be leaving Doge relatively soon. It didn't really affect Tesla stock much yesterday, but keep it in mind. Yeah, and Elon shared this post from Caroline Levitt and says, yeah, fake news. And last night, Trump announced that he is imposing a 10% across-the-board tariff on all imports to the U.S., as well as a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. So this is really going to hurt Stellantis, Ford, GM, and it will be interesting to see if Tesla can capitalize on this. By Ford, GM, Stellantis, they have a hard decision to make. They're not super profitable companies on a percent of net profits. These tariffs are going to wipe out their profits. They will have to raise prices. Well, kind of like a reverse price war, right? If Tesla can keep prices stable and competitors raise prices, the value proposition becomes even stronger than it already is to buy a Tesla, which could work out to Tesla's benefit. And here you can see Tesla is planning on building a new supercharger in New Mexico with a cyber canopy that includes solar and RGB lighting. The canopy will have a light design that looks like the front light bar on the Cybertruck, which is pretty cool. Trump says the 25% auto tariffs will cover $600 billion worth of auto parts and car computer imports. So no love lost for Ford, GM, and Stellantis, that's for sure. In response to this, starting today, Ford will offer employee pricing, a discounted rate available to its workers and to all customers. The program is called the From America for America plan and is available to U.S. shoppers. The initiatives or incentives apply to much of its lineup, including vehicles like the Mustang Mach-E and Maverick that are built in Mexico. Some vehicles, including its lucrative Super Duty trucks, are exempt. The promotion runs until June 2nd, Ford said. And Tesla's Europe and Middle East X account posted this image of a Model Y and says, "See you 1 week from today." That is the launch of Saudi Arabia, or the launch of Tesla into Saudi Arabia. The Tesla Europe and Middle East X account as well says the Model Y was the best-selling car in Norway in March and in Q1 of 2025. And JD Vance confirms that Elon Musk will stay on as an advisor to President Trump once he leaves Doge, as expected. JD Vance says, quote, "We said that's going to take about 6 months, and that's what Elon signed up for. But of course, he's going to continue to be an advisor. The work of Doge is not even close to done. The work of Elon is not even close to done. Doge has got a lot of work to do, and the work is going to continue after Elon leaves, but fundamentally, Elon is going to remain a friend and advisor of both me and the president, and he's done a lot of good things." And just in, Stellantis, the maker of Ram trucks and Jeeps, announced Thursday it is temporarily laying off 900 workers at 5 U.S. facilities following tariffs announced by Donald Trump. UBS analyst Joseph Spack reiterated a sell rating and $225 price target on Tesla today. He expects caution and negative 2025 revisions. Q1 deliveries, he points out how those were weaker. Production was weaker, impacted by the Model Y changeover. In inventory, approximately 124,000 units, 28 days on hand, up from 15 days in the last quarter. 2025 outlook has a consensus at 1.85 million deliveries. That's 4% year over year. UBS is at 1.7 million. That would be down 5% year over year. And he highlights challenges. Tesla needs 8% year over year growth for 1.85 million target. Even 1.6 million requires Q2 through Q4 2025 deliveries to rise 25% versus Q1 2025, which I think that's going to happen. I think Tesla's going to have a good year this year. And I think the Q1 lower delivery number is obvious. It was a production issue, not a demand issue. Now, also in the news today, China-U.S. negotiations are likely soon, according to Chinese advisors. Trade negotiations between China and the U.S. are likely to start soon, given President Donald Trump's penchant for deal-making, but a quick settlement looks difficult, with China calculating that the U.S. position will be weakened by a deterioration of its economy and markets, according to Chinese policy advisors that told MNI. Morningstar DBRS on U.S. tariffs. They say, quote, if implemented, it is bound to slow U.S. economic growth in the near term, raise consumer prices, and firms' input costs. And Mexico's President Sheinbaum says German automakers should export auto parts within the framework of the USMCA. And within the services PMI report today, we'll get into those numbers in just a moment. There is, quote, some worries over the impact of federal government policies, especially in relation to tariffs, meant confidence in the outlook fell to its lowest level since the end of 2022. Mexico's President Sheinbaum says a lack of new U.S. tariffs on Mexico is good for the country. She says the country has built a good relationship with the U.S. through dialogue and cooperation after Trump's tariff announcement. India's trade ministry says India will hold virtual meetings with the U.S. on bilateral deal this month. And India is considering to provide help to affected export sectors. The Swiss finance minister says he will travel to Washington for IMF meetings. And the odds of a U.S. recession this year on Kalshi, the betting website, is up 8.1 points in the last 24 hours, now sitting at 53% odds. And Scotiabank cuts U.S. equities to underweight from overweight rating. Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, says U.S. team is talking to trading partners today. Lutnick says the 20% China tariff would drop if Xi offers fentanyl cuts. And this tariff frenzy sets up a critical Powell speech on Friday. Friday remarks by Fed Chair Jerome Powell have been in the calendar for weeks, but they take on a new urgency after President Trump's tariff announcement shocked investors and business leaders. The speech, quote, will now be one of the most important Powell speeches in 3 years, Andy Brenner of Nat Alliance Securities wrote to clients. In his most recent comments, Powell has said that monetary policy is still in a restrictive stance, a, quote, good place, given that inflation remains above the Fed's target. Tariffs could threaten both sides of the Fed's dual mandate. However, by increasing inflation pressure while also dampening economic growth in the labor market, Powell is scheduled to speak at 11:25 a.m. Friday morning. And U.S. Commerce Secretary Lutnick says U.S. tariffs will go up if a country retaliates. Morgan Stanley now expects no interest rate cuts from the U.S. Fed in 2025 versus the prior forecast of one 25 basis point cut in June. That is starkly different than what markets are pricing in. As of right now, markets are pricing in the first Fed cut in June at 63.8% odds. Okay, there's about a 20% chance of a Fed cut coming May 7th, and I think Jerome Powell's speech on Friday could move those odds quite a bit, considering there's still almost 5 weeks until May 7th. White House Press Secretary Leavitt says Trump is focused on lowering costs while raising tariffs. The only way you really do that is during a recession, because if there's no recession, tariffs will cause prices to move higher. But if consumers react to those higher prices by buying less, companies will not be able to raise prices. So the only way this happens is if you have a recession. And Leavitt says tax cuts is the second step of Trump's economic agenda. Canada's Prime Minister told Trump last week that he would retaliate on auto tariffs. And he says that we need to reset our overall relationship with the United States. And he says, I am not at this time planning to coordinate Canada's response with other nations. And the WTO, the World Trade Organization, says tariffs could lead to a 1% decline in global goods trades in 2025. Canada's Prime Minister says until the pain caused by tariffs becomes impossible for the Trump administration to ignore, I do not believe they will change direction. So Carney's basically saying there's going to be so much pain, there's going to be a recession, that Trump will be forced to U-turn trade policy. And until that recession comes, he's not expecting much of a change from Trump. And Canada's prime minister says that an era of integration with the U.S. economy is, quote, over. And Canada will match U.S. tariffs on passenger vehicles. And U.S. Commerce Secretary Lutnick says Trump will negotiate only if other countries fix their tariffs and non-tariff barriers. French President Macron says all instruments are on the table to respond to U.S. tariffs. And France's President Macron urges companies to pause U.S. investments. He also says if Europeans work together in their response to U.S. tariffs, we will succeed in dismantling U.S. tariffs. And France's president says the response to Wednesday's announcement of U.S. tariffs will be more massive than the previous response. So, vowing some retaliation here. And he says the U.S. economy and consumers will become poorer and weaker. Now, we did have ISM services PMIs that came out today. Headline number for March came in at 50.8. The expectation was 53. So that came in quite a bit weaker than expected, almost in negative territory. Business activity came in at 55.9 versus estimates of 54. So that was a little bit better. Employment just plummeted to 46.2 versus expectations of 53. New orders came in at 50.4 versus 52 as was expected. Prices actually came down a lot. We were expecting 64. You came in at 60.9. That's lower than February's 62.6. So this was actually a weak services report, but also weak on the inflation side as well. So even considering that, with the sell-off that you're seeing in markets, TLT only up 0.6%, again, is not representative of fear out there. There's not fear out there, which is crazy that the S&P is down over 3% and you're seeing such a lack of fear. People are very stoic to what's happening in the markets today, which again makes me a little nervous that this correction cannot be over until you have mass capitulation. And we don't have that. So correction, my friends, sorry to tell you, is not over. But again, coming out tomorrow, we have non-farm payrolls for March, expecting a number between 135,000 and 80,000. Lower than 80,000, that's really bad. Above 130,000 or so, that's likely going to be seen as positive. The unemployment rate is expected to remain stable at 4.1%. And again, we have that speech from Fed Jerome Powell at 11:25 in the morning tomorrow. And people are going to hang on to every word Powell says. Now that we know what reciprocal tariffs are going to look like, we know how much pain that's going to cause in the economy, likely a recession. How does Powell respond to that? Is Powell just kind of neutral? Like he's just going to let things kind of see how they play out before responding? Or is Powell going to take a more, proactive response in trying to protect the economy? I mean, hard to say. I guess if you're Powell at this point, he's not the one that's going to be blamed for the recession. It's going to be Trump. So I don't know. It could go either way with Powell coming tomorrow. But I do think non-farm payrolls, unemployment rate, and the speech from Powell is a huge catalyst and will give us room to fall a lot more or maybe recover a bit if the economy shows that it's still doing okay. And again, Tesla stock today is outperforming a lot of its other big tech peers, outperforming Apple, outperforming Meta, outperforming Amazon, outperforming Nvidia. Similar kind of performance today from Google. And Microsoft's doing a little bit better than just kind of everyone else. Actually, a lot better. Microsoft's only down 1.5%. Apple's down 8%, right? So there is Tesla, Microsoft, Google that are relatively outperforming quite a bit, actually, your other big tech names, which I do think in and of itself is a pretty good sign. Now, Tesla kind of sits between this trend line here as resistance. That is around that 277 level. And support at the 20-day moving average around $254. So what do we do from here? Do we break out above the trend line and go back to your 200-day moving average? Or do you come back down and break lower? I think time Time will only tell on this one. Option activity today for Tesla is actually better than not. You have a positive order value of 62%, 174 different trades totaling $91.86 million. If you look at what short sellers are doing today, they're covering about 545,000 shares that they were previously short on. So that's pretty good, right? Especially on a day like today, to see short sellers covering that much is a step in the right direction. We did get a new AI investor sentiment survey that is interesting. Neutral investors got squeezed down to 16.3%. Bullish investors are off of the lows, some of the lows at like 19%. You're sitting at 21.8%, but bearish investors hit a new high at 61.9. So people are still bearish out there, but again, there's not a lot of fear out there in markets. The CNN Fear and Greed Index today is coming in at 12, which is the lowest number you've seen in quite a long time. The only category not in extreme fear is volatility. That is the VIX and its 50-day moving average. That is only in fear. The percent of stocks trading above their 50-day moving average falling about 30% today. About 8.5% of stocks are breaking below that 50-day moving average today. So you're sitting at about 20% of stocks in total that are above their 50-day moving average. So 80% of stocks are below their 50-day moving average. That's getting down there to a pretty low level, but it's not by all means the lowest we could go. There's still some room to get lower. And, well, I think a lot of the stocks above their 50-day moving average would be value and like the XLP, right? The, consumer staples ETF that is almost at a new high. That's probably where basically all of the strength is in markets right now. But again, it's not a sign of fear if people are going out and buying the Coca-Colas, the Kellogg's, right? The consumer staple names. And until you see just panic out there, mass selling of everything, be careful trying to call a bottom in markets. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts on all of this down below in the comments section. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.